Hello, my name is Chris Snipes, and you are listening to The Melt. Before we get into today's interview with Dr. Diana Pasulka, author of American Cosmic, let's hear of someone's first-hand UFO encounter, namely Kimmy Robertson from Twin Peaks. Well, she's not from Twin Peaks. She was on a show called Twin Peaks. She's actually from California. Fuck it.
Hi, this is Kimmy Robertson. I'm an actor, but back when this happened, well, let's see, I guess I was kind of an actor. It was in the early 80s, back when we had Monday Night Football. And every Monday in the fall, I would go over to my friend's house, Pat, and a bunch of my friends from high school would come by, and we'd have chili and sit out by the pool and watch Monday Night Football. So this one night, it was just going to be three of us, Pat, Greg, and me. And Greg was late. So Pat and I sat opposite each other with a bonfire in between and the TV on a little low wall next to us. And we were just talking. And all of a sudden, he put his hand up to his right ear, and I put my hand up to my left ear. So remember, we were facing each other. So both of our ears on that side, which I guess was the southeast side, was the weirdest sound I've ever heard. It was like no other sound. And I could picture in my head an arcing light with something in the middle, and it going like in a big archway over our heads like a rainbow. But it really hurt. It was an indescribable sound. And we were like, what was that? No idea, we both said. And then Greg came about half an hour later. He came bursting through the gate and was like, you guys, sorry I'm late, but I saw this thing in the sky and I had to follow it. Something crashed. I had to go find where it crashed, but I couldn't ever find it. And he described it as a arcing light like a rainbow with a circular light in the middle that was brighter, that as it reached towards the ground, it went up to the top of the rainbow shape, and then as it started going down, it started to stretch out like an almond. And he pointed exactly where it was that we heard this, and he never could find where it crashed. So Pat said, I'm going to call my dad's friend in Washington. So he went over to the phone. He had a phone outside, very fancy for the early 80s. And he called this some general in Washington. And he was on the phone for a little while, and he came back over and he said, well, yeah, that was the mothership, and it didn't crash. It just looks like that. That's when they're exiting the atmosphere. So that was a UFO, apparently, and this general in Washington knew all about it because he said when they exit the atmosphere, they get all stretched out looking like that, and looks like they're hitting the ground. They're just going around the planet to exit in a certain spot. So there you go. That's my story. Bye now.
It's easy to take for granted just how much we are kept between the signposts within this consensus reality. It is all too easy to think that most of us even have anywhere near the whole picture of how this whole cosmos actually works. We elect politicians, designate experts, and pick our news sources out of less than 5 internationally and convince ourselves that they're giving us the real story and that all the others have it wrong, just like some people view their religion. But sometimes, the more certain we are of a particular concept, the more that same certainty prevents us from exploring it any further, or realizing that there are infinite concepts on which to ponder, and that rather than thinking that we exist in an either-or reality, that we more likely exist in an all of the above and so much more that I'm not even aware of reality. Humility is important, and it seems to be in short supply. I love realizing that there are many more layers to it all than even I suspected. Dr. Diana Pasulka's latest book, American Cosmic, UFOs, Religion, Technology, has that very effect. She has delved into what was formerly referred to as the invisible college of UFO research, the kind we will never hear about, the kind that is scrubbed daily from the internet. While searching for the connections between religion and UFO culture, she discovers that there are many layers to today's ufology, and that there is a concerted effort to keep any of us from finding out. It begins with her being blindfolded on a 45-minute-long car ride to a place where UFO artifacts are said to be, and ends in the Vatican's secret library. I begin the interview by asking her if she's had any previous interest in UFOs or extraterrestrial contact before her research began for this book.
Okay, so that's a complicated question. And no, I have to say no. I always thought people who believe in UFOs were actually somewhat crazy. That said, however, when I was a child, and I subsequently learned this through the research that I've been doing since 2012, I learned that the place where I grew up was basically the place of a classified project, not necessarily project, but program where people were studied for UFO contact. And this was in the midst of when I was around 14. And during that time period, I remember I did not know why, but I would walk outside at night, unbeknownst to my parents.
That's the best context to do that in.
Yeah. And I would look up at the stars and I would say, will you please come get me? And I never knew why I felt that. And I also had a very intense, I would call it a childhood depression, where I thought that the world was going to end. And then when I read John Mack's book, I realized that that was pretty classic, kind of idea of people who have had these experiences. My brother had experiences where he would, for years and years, he kept his light on at night. So the area it was like a Hudson Bay area, right? It was that area. And so I didn't know this until I met people in specific programs that actually studied that area and the people in that area. And my family was one of the targets because it's studied in families
Yeah,
that
yeah.
had been identified to study. And I did not know that. I didn't know any of this, frankly. I didn't think, I never watched Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I had never, but I was intensely interested in religion, so much that it was not normal. So as an 11-year-old child, I determined that I was going to learn the languages of, say, the Bible, and figure out what, because I read it, and I thought, this doesn't make sense. So I think I need to read the languages in order to make sense out of this, which I ended up doing.
Wow.
And I did it and I also learned about other religions as well. So I think that I don't know what happened to me as a child. It never occurred to me that it had anything UFO related, but now when I look back on it, I see entirely that it was completely, and when I talk to people now, they've had similar experiences, and it was completely instigated by something like that. So yeah.
What makes you call it an abnormal fascination with religion?
Most kids are not interested in religion, and when I was 11, I had what I would call a very, very profound conversion experience, where I felt that humans needed to, humans, we could actually have a paradise on earth. And the only reason why we didn't is because of the things called greed, love of money, that type of thing. And I thought, that's, I just didn't understand that. And I thought that studying religion and philosophy and morality would actually help me understand why people weren't getting with the program, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's why that, and also I have to admit that the first time I had read the Beatitudes, Jesus's Sermon on the Mount and that type of thing, and even some of the Buddhist texts, they were profoundly intriguing to me. I was like, these are beautiful, this is beautiful. And so I was interested in that, and I wanted to know about people who were interested in the beauty of, frankly, we live in this universe, and that's weird. We live on a planet that is exactly a Goldilocks, in a Goldilocks area. I mean, all of these things to me didn't seem coincidental. They seemed miraculous. And so I think that the miraculous to me was something that was very real. And so that's why I wanted to study religion, because in science, well, actually in science, what I found in my book was that the scientists knew that this was miraculous. And so that's what they were studying too. And that's why I affiliated with them and wanted to study. And this is why I did this book. I mean, if you look at the history of my publications, they're sincerely just very strictly religious studies, very normal for my field. But they do have to do with extraordinary experiences. And so when I had finished a book that I had written on purgatory, the doctrine of purgatory in the Catholic Church, which is supposedly an afterlife doctrine, but it came actually from places on Earth. And I went through a lot of archives and old documents, from 1200 to 1800. And what I saw were patterns of aerial phenomena and people having these experiences. And I wasn't quite sure what to make of them, because, I had this kind of, I didn't really correlate them to my past. And so I showed them to a friend of mine, and I said, what do you think of this? I want to write about this because it's so strange. Nuns seeing flames coming through their walls, and, people seeing aerial phenomena that would communicate with them telepathically. I mean, these are like Catholics, right? They weren't, they weren't modern people, so they interpreted them differently than we
Yeah,
would.
sure.
And so my friend looked at it and he said, wow, this looks like Steven Spielberg type things, like UFOs. And I honestly, at the time, I thought he was ridiculous. I was like, no. But strangely enough, synchronistically enough, the next week there was a UFO conference in my town, and I attended it. And there I heard a very well-known experiencer, Chris Bledsoe, who actually lives near me, and we are now very good friends. And I heard his testimony and the testimony of many other people. And I realized that they were basically saying the same things that the people in the 1200s, 1300s, 1400s were saying. And so I thought, wow, I'm going to start to look at this. This is my next book. So that's what I did. That's how it began.
That's how you made the leap from being a professor of religion to being sort of in the middle of UFO culture.
Yes.
That's interesting. And it kind of makes sense too that we don't see them, at least we're not so quick to label them as angels and such, because as you say in your book, media has played such a big role in how we perceive these experiences that, of course, it just makes more sense to think of them as aliens or coming in flying saucers or, something much more otherworldly than something from say a Christian cosmology.
Yes, so that's one thing I wanted to do in my book was, I'm in the field of religious studies, and religious studies is an interdisciplinary, there aren't many of us, but we look at religion interdisciplinary. We have archaeologists, historians, sociologists, and we have a way of looking at religion, which isn't necessarily, we're not promoting religion. So we're not, theologians. And we're looking at how religion develops and what, it's all over the world, right? And it's been from the very beginning of human history. So we're looking at what it is, what is this thing we call religion? And so what I wanted to show in this book was that religion really, how we interpret these contacts we have, what we consider to be non-human intelligences from the sky, and how do we interpret those? And I talk about infrastructure. And so, back in 1200, there was a certain infrastructure, and it included a history of what's called angelology, right? So, so we interpret these things in, right now we're in a new age of technology. We'll not go back unless there's like, a giant meteor who takes most of us out, then we will go back. But, we have technology now, and it's a game changer. I'm a professor. I've seen young people 10 years ago, none of them were on phones. Today, you can't walk down my hallway in my university without seeing every single kid on their phone, right? Okay. So we are now in a new age, and we don't know the consequences of that, but it has absolutely affected the way we think about the sacred and the transcendent. So that's really what I was trying to show in my book. However, once I began my book, I recognized that there was a lot of government intervention. And this is something I did not expect. And so I did not also expect the media intervention. So but I should have. So when I look back on the history of Christianity, you have both, really. You have government intervention, the Roman Empire. You have media intervention, which is the reaction of the biblical texts. And so here I was at this place that Carl Jung called, the beginning of a legend, the beginning of a religion. Here we are, we can now study it. And so that's what I felt like my job was to do. However, it was very, very odd, very, very strange, changed my whole view of reality. And yeah.
I like it. For the better, or just different.
Yeah, of course. I
Yeah,
mean, I believe that if anything is truthful, it's for the better.
absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. And in many ways, science, some people call it scientism, is sort of a new religion in and of itself. So it makes sense that we're trying to channel all of our experiences through the lens of science and what can or cannot be replicated, what is legitimate and what isn't legitimate. So yeah, it's interesting that I like that you approached at the beginning of the book UFOs and ufology with trying to find the similarities between that and religion. And so, what during the study, what role did you find that media does play in our concepts regarding UFOs and ETs and stuff like that?
Right. So, okay, so I did work on The Conjuring, which is it may be the first, I don't know, it was the second highest grossing film about the supernatural so far
Wow.
in history. And so I was the quote unquote religion history consultant for that because the screenwriters were awesome. They were great guys. But they had no idea about traditional Catholicism, which is basically what they were, the movie was about. So, so I was interested in this as kind of like, oh, great, I get to embed research. I'm like an embedded researcher. I get to see exactly how religious belief is cultivated through media, which I was already interested in. And so I absolutely saw that. And the kinds of things that were somewhat disturbing were that, well, first of all, the movie was awesome.
Yeah.
And James Wan as a director is incredible. And the Hayes brothers who wrote it, incredible guys. So that said, I also saw that when they went to do the editing, because I was on set a lot. So when they went to do the editing, they hooked up audiences. There is a department at UC Irvine that helps the media industry determine what lights up the brain when you watch it and what doesn't. So they would hook people up to, I don't know if they're EKGs or what, but they would hook them up to these, their brains up to these apparati, and they would find out which scenes lit up the brain, and they would take out those scenes that didn't. Okay. Now, to his credit, James Wan was interested. I think he's Australian, Chinese Australian, and so he's here, and he wanted representation of Asian people, and so he was able to, the people that lit up Conjuring were Vera Farmiga, who's a actress, and she's very appealing to audiences. So every one of her scenes was kept, right? But a lot of the other people's scenes were cut out. But James Wan was able to make, he's a very, very what would you call it? He's good. So he basically was like, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to lend my name to it unless you do this. I don't know if that's true, but somehow he kept a lot of the scenes that were not representationally lighting up your brain. So, okay, so I got to see exactly how media is created as a physiological event where we interact with it with our brains. It's almost as if I said to you, don't think of a lemon. Okay, don't think of it, and then your salivary glands are they're gonna go no matter what I say about a lemon, right? They're gonna feel it. So this is the same thing with a movie. So the more they engage with your cognitive physiology, the more you're actually going to believe it, even though you don't believe it. So on one level, you don't believe it. Your rational mind does not believe it, but you don't. Your rational mind is just one part of your brain. So you have all these other parts of your brain that are going to believe it. So I was able to identify, with the help, by the way, of other cognitive scientists like Jeffrey Sachs's book. I think it's called Your Mind on No. Your Brain on Movies. It's a really great book for your audience if they want to read it. And it's scary because, it's like, it shows us why we're addicted to media. The dopamine rushes we get, and we're basically just, it's like food for us, or it's like it's not what we think it is. We kind of think that it's a part of us, but it's separate from us. It's not. So we are absolutely engaged with our media in a physiological way. So when that comes to UFOs, what we see about UFOs completely primed us to understand what UFOs are. And what I found was that that's not true. So I found two things. I found, first, there was an industry of UFOs in the media. And everything we think we know about UFOs and all that kind of stuff through the media is wrong. Okay? And so what I found was that the people who actually were involved in the study, the actual study, and there are government studies, we know that now, and they're more than $22 million. They're more like in the billions of dollars to study them. The more those people are engaged, some of them can't even be on, they can't be on media. So I call them they're really invisible. It's not just the invisible college, it's the UFO Fight Club. So they can't even talk to each other about what they know. So it is a big, kind of like a big secret about what we can know about these things that are out there that are unknowable or knowable, but we don't, this is a very managed process. And then what the media tells us is real.
So what do you think that there is a specific agenda behind that?
I mean, there's no agenda. I think that, well, there is an agenda and there is no agenda. Let's put it that way. So the agenda is that I think that a lot of governments know that there are these real things. They don't know what they are. It tries to communicate with them. These things try to communicate with us. And we don't have established, I mean, we have somewhat established communication. However, if people around the world knew that, I mean, it would be a game changer. And so I think that, just like with Christianity, Christianity was a game changer because Jesus said, love one another. Well, before that, people were like, they didn't care. They killed each other, and they, there were all kinds of terrible things that would happen. And so the Roman Empire comes along and kind of takes over Christianity and by the way, I am Catholic, so I can say this. And so, it basically manages the perception of Jesus, basically. And if you want to read a good book about Jesus, Riza Aslan's Zealot is a good book about Jesus. And Dominic Crossan writes a good book about Jesus too for your Christian audience. And, the real historical Jesus. And so the Roman Empire comes along and changes that idea. And so here we have the same thing happening. We have a real contact experience happening to many people, not just one. And we have a narrative about it, and it's being, I write about it in my book, where I say, so there's the organization called MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and I know many, many, many good people in that network. However, when you upload your experience to MUFON, they own it then, and then they can actually present it on like the History Channel or Netflix or something like that.
Crazy.
And they can completely change the narrative of it. And they have in the case of Chris Bledsoe and Ray Hernandez. And so, and I talk about that in the book. And so I say that, what's happening to early religions is now happening to this UFO narrative. So it's being completely managed.
Well, how did you actually penetrate the Fight Club? How did you get into the Invisible College? How did you gain access?
Okay, so that is a conundrum to me still. And I think that, I mean, I I do have skills, right, as a person who studies religion and historical Catholic, Catholic, um, okay, let's put it this way. Say you are part of a very small, we're talking very small, like maybe like 7 people program who studies UFOs, and you want to know if what happened to Cuba in Cuba, like to, the nationals and stuff, and then the frequencies and stuff like that. If you want to know if those are something that are created by humans or have been around for a while. So who do you go to? Well, you go to people like me who have studied strange things like this from 1200, 1300, because I guarantee you they did not have the technology we have today. And so if they did have something similar back then, and I have access to those original sources in whatever language, and they can't access those sources, they don't have credentials or anything like that, then they're going to come to me and find out. And so I think that's how it happened. I don't know. I just know that about 5 years ago, um, I started to get communications from people who I know are affiliated with Robert Bigelow, and they wanted to read some of the articles that I read, which, by the way, are all online. And so I said, sure, yeah, here, this is about angels and their physical existence. And, but to me, it was completely, I didn't believe it. But to these people, they were looking at it, they were scientists, they were like really looking at it as if it were real. And I thought to myself, well, this is really weird. And so the more I got into it, the more I realized that what they're trying to do is just acquire data.
So, how did you get connected? There's two main people that you, in this invisible college, that you interact with throughout the book, James and Tyler. And how did you get pointed in their direction? And maybe if you can tell us a little bit about both of them and their role in this whole story.
Sure. So they contacted me. Okay. So I was hesitant. First of all, when I began my study, which was around late 2011, 2012, I thought it would be a pretty easy book, right? So I thought, okay, this is really an easy book to write. What we believed were angels in the past, we now believe are UFOs in the present, blah, blah, blah. I will now go and interview a bunch of experiencers. But what I found was that there were lots of scientists who congregated around these experiencers. And these were not just scientists, these were like the top scientists. So being an academic, I know what it requires to be the best at what you do in academia, and it's a lot. You have to be a genius, you have to have labs, you have so I was impressed. So I decided that I was going to I was going to move my research from the experiencers to the actual, what I would call meta experiencers, the scientists. And so I started to ask them questions, and they were really forthcoming. And I think part of it was that they were interested in, well, I know for sure Tyler wanted to know what I knew about the historical occurrences of these kinds of aerial phenomena. And that's what he's done his whole life. And he was affiliated with the space program. And James is a top researcher, top of his field in the world. And so he was fascinated. He had experiences himself. And so he was, this was like his passion. And he already was at the top of his game. I mean, you can't get better than James. I mean, he was, big guy. So he wins. So there's no, problem for him to study whatever he wants. And so, So Tyler knew that I knew about the phenomena, but I didn't believe in it. I didn't believe that it was physical, let's put it that way. And he said, I can take you to a place where I can prove it's physical. And so I said, where's that? And he said, New Mexico. And I said, whoa, that's interesting. So I put him off for a while because I was still a little freaked out by this whole culture, of the invisible college. And so then I said, I'll go if I can bring someone. So I asked, a few of my colleagues, and they were like, whoa, this is too weird for me. But James was all over it. So he said, yes, yes, yes. So we went, and it was in New Mexico. It was a crash site of an alien. This is what they alleged, that there was a crash site here. It was in the 1940s, and there were about 7 in the 1940s, around 1947 or so. And there were crash sites all over New Mexico. And so I went out there with them, and we did find parts. Maybe some were planted. I don't know. And I agree, that's kept as a question throughout my book. And these parts were looked at by lots and lots of incredible scientists who couldn't figure out how they could have been made. And I believe these people because if you look at my record, I have a pretty standard academic record where I haven't said anything super controversial. And here I am saying these people who have peer-reviewed articles in the biggest journals in science are saying this. And so that's all I'm reporting. And so that's how and I also met a lot of people. I met Jacques Vallée, and Jacques Vallée is one of the most interesting people I've met. He did a lot of work. I read his work in the 1970s. I didn't read it in the 1970s, but I got it in the 1970s. I read it. And he was doing stuff that people are now doing now. So he was already, thinking way ahead of his time. And so he and I became, we worked together and still work together. And so I don't know how I met a lot of people, let's put it that way. I met a lot of people that I couldn't believe I met.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And at one point, James, when you guys are looking for this stuff in the desert, he refers to one of the artifacts that you guys find as a donation. What did he mean by that?
Okay, so James thinks that he believes that we are kind of like the story of 2001: A Space Odyssey, that we're kind of being led, and that this was given to us as a donation to help us increase ability to become more technological. There was one point in the book where I asked him, is it a good thing, James, or is it bad? And he said, I don't know yet. Could it be a Trojan horse type thing?
Interesting. That reminds me of in Tibetan Buddhism, there are teachings that teachers from centuries ago would leave in rocks or deep in caves or something like that, because at the time the civilization wasn't ready for the teachings, and then they would be found in the future when they were ready for it. So it's kind of interesting, like if that is true, like a trail of breadcrumbs is being left behind for us to pick up and evolve at our own little pace.
Wow, that's really cool. I like that.
Yeah, I do too. I thought that's really magical. Something really cool about that. Somebody from so long ago having such foresight to, leave crumbs for people that don't exist for generations and generations. I thought that was really fascinating. So, did you know at all about this quote unquote invisible college before you started researching all this stuff, or did you not know until they started tapping you on the shoulders?
Yes, I did not know about it. So I am an academic, so I spend most of my time researching and doing, reading and figuring stuff out, calling people, talking to people. So I quickly learned about the invisible college. And I also understood it to be something that happened in modernity, early modernity, when people like Francis Bacon were making inroads to science that weren't accepted and could get you killed for the most part. So Alan Hynek and Jacques created this thing called the Invisible College, or they called it that. It was kind of a term that they used because it said, they could, they're all academics, with PhDs. And so they don't want to come out as quote unquote crazy UFO believers, but they were doing legitimate research. And in fact, Edgar Mitchell, a scientist who went up in space, was doing the same type of research. And so it was something that our US government was doing. And then they couldn't be out, quote unquote. What I saw, though, was that this invisible college from the 1970s morphed into what I would call, there's this movie called Fight Club, and it's it's a 1990 movie, 1999, I think. And so in that movie, there's a group of men who developed this fight club, but they don't talk about it. And it's kind of like a movement. It's like an anti-cultural movement. And this is what I saw happening. I saw that the Invisible College could no longer talk to each other. And in fact, the people that knew the most about the phenomena could not talk to the next person who knew as much as that person knew. And I tried to introduce them because, here I was on a macro level meeting a lot of these different people, knowing what they did and knowing that if they just met each other, they could figure some, really important things out.
Exactly.
But if I suggested it to them, they would say they would never talk to me again.
Was it more a case of them being forbidden by the people above them, or was it more of an ego thing, like they wanted to keep all the secrets for themselves?
No, it's not an ego thing. They basically signed clearances. They could go to federal prison if they talked about it.
And I wonder who it was that handed them that paperwork.
I do not know. But I promise you this, I would never sign a clearance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it seems like, especially in Tyler's case, he seems sort of lonely through some of the book.
Yes, he's a tragic guy. So a lot of people are fascinated by Tyler, and I've had so many people try to ask me who he is, who's Tyler, want me to introduce me to him and that kind of thing. But allow me to tell you this, that I would not want to be Tyler. I mean, Tyler is a multimillionaire. He seems to have everything. He's got an amazing career. He's kind of like nobody I've ever met before. Let's put it that way. He's kind of like Jason Bourne, right? In the Bourne Identity. That's the kind of guy he is. And he really exists. However, he is not happy.
Sure. Is it even after what occurs, which I won't give away, towards the end of the book, is he happier after that?
He is.
Good.
He is, yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And you guys are still in contact?
Somewhat, yeah. I mean, I have to be careful because I have this book out. He's got a special kind of job, so. But I can report that the conversion, or I shouldn't say what. Yeah. So what happened to him stuck, and he's a different person, and I just have a lot of respect for him.
That's wonderful. And that happened when you guys, a part of the book that we haven't spoken about yet, when what was the initial reason that you were going you got access to the Vatican Library?
So the book was finished, actually. I mean, it had already been done. It was a year late. So, my editor was like, when's it coming, And so I finished last chapter, which was about Ray Hernandez and his wife and their experience, and I turned it in. And then I have my own career here. So I had been asked to go to the Vatican, and it was by a Catholic philanthropist. And he said that he would pay the way, and he would want me to look at the levitation records of levitation is when someone can kind of fly.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to put it.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, in the Catholic tradition. It's also in the Buddhist tradition. So people can kind of like rise off the ground, and sometimes they can bilocate and fly and things like that. So there were two saints. I was supposed to go to. I have the credentials to get into the Vatican secret archive, and so it takes about a year to get yourself in there. So I had started a year previously to do this. I accepted the job, and my job was to basically look at the manuscripts of two people, one in Spain and one in Italy, Joseph Cupertino in Italy, and Mary of Agreda in Spain. And they lived at roughly the same time period, the 1600s. And they both had similar experiences of levitation, except that Mary of Agreda actually believed that she could fly above the earth, and she wrote a lot of cosmographies, which were basically books where she was in space and she looked down upon the spinning earth and she saw a lot of things, and a lot of the things were very accurate. So it's a conundrum for the Catholic Church. They're like, how does she know these things? But we are not sure we believe her. So the person who sent me said, can you please try to figure out why one is a saint and one can't be a saint? Like, she's in this beatification phase where she most likely, it's not looking good for her. So I then decided, who would help me with this is Tyler. Like, Tyler knows about this kind of stuff. He knows about all these things, the cosmographies and stuff. And by the way, I was going to also go to the Space Observatory, which is in Castel Gandolfo and is headed up by an acquaintance of mine, Brother Guy Consolmagno. And I had met him about, again, a year earlier, and I had said, where does all the space information about the Vatican go to? And he goes, he said, it goes to my archive. And I said, really? And he goes, yeah, come on anytime. We have a space for you. We have like a scholars quarters, and you can stay there as long as you want. And so that was my main reason to go, by the way. So I accepted the philanthropist's funding to go, but I was super interested in going to the space archive because I really wanted to know what the Vatican knew about anything that related to space. Yeah. And I had Tyler with me, who was a space program guy, right? So we go there, and Tyler gets there first, and he's not able to get in to the secret archive. And I'm on the plane, and he's texting me saying, what do I do? Should I show them my credentials? And I said, no. If you show them your credentials, they're going to follow us, and they're going to think we're weird. And,
not going to let either of us in.
Yeah. So finally, he's there for like 4 hours, I think. And finally says, I'm just going to show them. So he shows them, and he drops something on the floor, and he goes down, and then he looks up, and he sees his face in the computer at the Vatican. So apparently they knew exactly who he was. And he had full access. And in fact, I would not have gotten as much access as I did had I not had him with me. Wow. So we went and we did the study, and we went to Castel Gandolfo, where the space archive was. And there was a bunch of young European space scientists there. And they knew exactly who Tyler was. And they were like, woohoo, like, what is wrong with the United States? We don't know anything. None of our young people know anything about space and how, what's going on and stuff. But Europeans love it. They just love it. So it was really cool. And I got to see it, and Tyler was really, kind of felt really positive about it. And it was really cool. We got to see the, how they looked up. And it was a beautiful place, too, I have to say. It was on this volcanic lake. And the scholarly place was right in the Vatican archive, and we had full access to the archive, and I got to see there was a whole section on extraterrestrial
Whoa.
intelligence and stuff like that.
Wow.
It was really, really cool. So, yeah. So I'm sorry, Chris, I can't remember what your question was, but yeah.
Me either. Who cares what my question was? Well, so was all of this text in Italian? Did you have to get a translator? Or?
Oh, yeah. So this was all in Latin and 17th century Italian. And so I took Latin. My languages were French, German, and Italian. I mean, not Italian, but Latin. And I also took some Greek. So I never used Greek, so I just don't know it. But I occasionally, like for my purgatory book, I would use Latin. So I had a dictionary that allowed me to translate a good, I would say about, oh gosh, this is going to make your audience horrified, but probably about 7% of the manuscript. So, and that took me a long time to do. So what I did when I got back was the philanthropist made me the head editor, and I had to hire people who were expert at doing just translations of, because first century Latin is different than 10th century Latin, which is different than 17th century Latin. So that was not my specialty. So I had to hire some people to do that. And they're in the process of doing it right now. And I had to basically sign my soul away and say that based on excommunication from the church, I cannot allow this to be released on the internet. And it has to be password protected and stuff like that. So it was a crazy kind of time.
Interesting. And how much time did you actually spend in the library?
So there were two libraries. There was the secret archive at the Vatican, and I spent about 5 days there.
Wow.
And then there was the Castle Gandolfo archive, which, by the way, these archives were so incredibly different, you wouldn't even believe it. They were 180 degrees different. So the first archive in the Vatican, you had to have like the credentials to get in, and then you had to go through like 3 points of identification in order to get it. It took a long time to get in, and you get in there, right? And then you have to know exactly what you're looking for. I think that their archives is like 5 miles. So they have, you have to tell them many months in advance what you need. And then there were some things that they wouldn't give me, and I knew that they were there. And I said, no. I said, I know this is here because it's referenced in this book. And I showed them the book. And then they sat there and they looked at me. And, these are all men, right? And so they would only refer to me as the lady professor.
What?
And so, yeah. And so then they would go back, and they got the head archivist, and he came out. And then I got Tyler to come up with me because I thought, they're going to listen to this man more than me. So I said, Tyler, you have to ask them for this document, because this is what we need. This is the very specific thing we need about the levitation of Joseph of Cupertino. And so Tyler then said what I said to the head archivist. And the archivist didn't look at Tyler this time, which he generally did. He looked directly at me, and he said, no. And I said,
no two ways to interpret that.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. So, but it was completely different when I went to Castle Gandolfo, because, and you have to understand that the Castle Gandolfo Space Archive is run by an American Jesuit, okay? And so I don't know if you've ever seen the other guy, Contamagno. He is one of the coolest guys ever. And all of his people that work with him were all incredibly, they were just scientific nerds,
Sure.
And so I felt completely at home. And so Brother Guy gives me a tour of the archive at Castle Gandolfo, which is about an hour and a half north of the Vatican. And he gave me the key, and he said, you can look at anything you want. And
Wow.
I mean, it was such a different experience than the Rome experience,
Sure.
I was like, wow. But unfortunately, I did lose a copy of an original Kepler.
You lost it there?
And Yes. And then,
Oh,
and so I think yeah, but they found it again. So I
oh,
was like,
good.
okay, wait a minute, let me think. Where did I put it? And so they were like a little freaked out.
You didn't happen to leave a webcam in there by any chance, did you?
No, that would be cool. I took a bunch of pictures though.
Cool. Well, that stinks because if you have to sort it out so many months ahead of time, it's not like you can spontaneously just come up upon something and decide that you want to look at it, right? Like
No, we
you.
did.
Oh,
We
you did?
did. Yeah, no, that always happens in
Oh,
archives for
fantastic.
me. Yeah, yeah. So
Cool.
it happened with my Purgatory book, and it also happened with this. And so one of the things that I realized when I was at the Castle Gandolfo archive was that Maria of Agreda from Spain was actually in New Mexico, almost at the same place where I had been with Tyler and James.
Wow.
It was weird, and I thought, what? And so I looked up and I looked at Tyler, and he was reading, something about. I mean, he was reading this like he was in heaven. You have to understand. This guy has devoted his entire life to space, and here he was in, the Western ground zero for space research, and so he was in heaven. So he was like looking at something about electromagnetism in space or something, and I looked up at him and I said, Tyler. And he looked at me and I said, do you know where Maria Agreda went? And he looked at me and he said, no. And I said, she went to this place in New Mexico. And I kind of told him where it was. And he looked at me like, don't talk about that.
Don't get any wise ideas. Interesting. Wow, that's a cool full circle there.
It was pretty weird. I
Yeah.
have to admit it. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
did you get a chance or have the desire to look into any of the extraterrestrial stuff in the library?
Oh, of course I did. That's exactly where I went to first.
Cool.
Yeah, and when I was on social media, I posted it all on Facebook. So I had to get off of social media after my book was released for various reasons. But for those people who were on social media with me, and if they downloaded it, so I took a whole picture of the huge space I mean, it was like 10 feet tall and I'd say about 15 to 20 feet long of extraterrestrial research from back in the day, a long
Oh,
time ago until the present. And I went through all of it. It's like I woke up in the morning, the monks would have lattes. Oh my gosh, the lattes were awesome. So I'd have a latte, and then I'd go right into the archive and I'd just start looking at everything. And I just kind of made my way up until I got to the 1970s and the 1980s. So in the 1970s, well, let's put it this way, the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, there was incredible federal money that was all out there. It was all completely transparent to the American public about what they spent, or at least from what I could tell. They may have spent more, I don't know, on extraterrestrial research. And they were doing it for intelligent extraterrestrial research, okay? So, you have Carl Sagan and, all these people getting grants from Harvard and this type of thing. Okay, so then the 1980s comes along and all of a sudden, boom, it stops. And then the 1990s comes along. There's almost nothing in the 1980s. And then in the 1990s, it's none of it is published. And a lot of it has to do with microbial life on other planets, nothing that has to do with intelligent life.
I wonder why that is.
I don't know, but I thought it was interesting. These are the kinds of things that make academics go crazy.
I can imagine. Yeah, and it's weird that it's at such a precise time. Like that part of the research just took over the intelligent extraterrestrial life research. That's really strange. Huh.
Yeah, so some of your viewers might know what that connection was. Tyler certainly did.
Okay. But he wasn't telling you.
He told me, but I can't say.
Gotcha. What if $1 million appeared in your bank account?
And
I'm just
Chris,
kidding.
guess what?
What? You don't have a bank account?
Something like that could have happened, yeah, but I have resisted. I know it's hard to believe. People are like, "Oh, you're crazy." Yeah. I've been so criticized. I was like, look, this never happened. I promise you, I'm not making this up. But I was offered about that much money to do this kind of stuff, and I said no.
Wow. That doesn't surprise me at all. Uh, I've got a pretty far out imagination, and I've done a lot of research since I was since middle school, in all of this stuff. And as far out of things that I've read and studied and researched, I still think that it's probably in reality much more far out than even I've researched. So that doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah. In fact, you asked me before, you kind of sent me some questions and you said, how did this change your reality? There's pre 2012 Diane and Diana, and I will never, ever be the same.
You cut out there. The audio cut out there for a second. You said you started to say there's pre 2012 Diana, and then what did you say after that?
I said there's post 2012 Diana, and they are not the same.
Mm-hmm. What are the main differences?
Now I believe, and I know that there are ongoing programs, and I know that most of us will never know about them because of the Fight Club.
Do you think that the Fight Club? I'm sorry. I thought you were done speaking, but the audio keeps cutting out. I apologize.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You were saying you cut off at because none of us will ever know because of the Fight Club, and then that's when it stopped.
Yeah, there's a Fight Club. I mean, the Fight Club is managed. So, at one point, and this is, I'd say it happened 2 years ago. I had a person who is the equivalent of Tyler, who lived in another country, worked for the same type of, space program, had similar information. And I thought if I could get these two together, they could really, really understand this and make some sense out of it. So I proposed it to Tyler, and Tyler got really mad at me and said, you're welcome to talk to that person, but if you do, I will never talk to you again.
Wow.
Yeah, he basically said, that's the point. We're not supposed to know.
Why?
Yeah. So it goes against everything that academics, and this is what I wrote in the first chapter of my book. I basically said that what they're doing goes against everything academics are creating it. Sorry. Are we back?
Yeah, you keep cutting out, unfortunately. I apologize.
No, that's okay.
I have nothing to do with it, but I'm going to apologize anyway. Could you just repeat the last thing that you said?
Yes. So academics are about, kind of sharing knowledge, helping each other, revealing our sources. But the UFO Fight Club is the opposite.
And that is the way that it is because of the forms that they sign.
Yeah. Another thing is that they get people really young and they kind of like cultivate them. And I think that this is a huge game changer for humanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they need that, this is a government type thing. And so, I just don't. I mean, frankly, I never thought I would be involved with something like this in my life ever.
Well, I think that, with this book even that you've written, I think that people now know, those who have read it, obviously, know a little bit more than they did before. And even just knowing that there is a Fight Club, I think is a tiny step in knowing things that have much more import. So maybe it's just got to happen in baby steps, or maybe it takes some hardcore hacking into government computers and disclosing all of that stuff for this stuff to come to light. I can't help but think that at some point it can't be contained.
No, it can't be contained. And I believe that is why there's what I would call like a disclosure happening, not official disclosure, but there is a disclosure happening.
Sure. Do you think that some people have said that even in different forms of media, since your book has something to do with that too, that there are little slices of disclosure that are being sort of leaked out in the safe blanket of, say, a science fiction movie?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
Interesting. All so compelling. And what an excellent book. Thank you so much for writing it.
Thank you so much.
It's amazing, and I would love to talk more about it, but I know that you have time limitations, and I appreciate having had as much time to talk about all this stuff as we've had so far. And thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed.
Absolutely, Chris. Is wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you would tell our listeners where they can find out more about the book and about other stuff that you've done.
Sure. So I'm going to be changing up my website, but it's americancosmic.com. And I've been invited basically, it's almost like every 2 weeks I'm going somewhere speaking about it. To fairly legitimate places, all legitimate places, universities, the Guggenheim, the Commonwealth Club, and all over the United States. So I'm gonna put that up on my website soon. And then I have a university website, University of North Carolina in Wilmington, Diana Pasulka. And the book is sold everywhere. It's sold in Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, at the Oxford University Press site. And so that's about it.
Fantastic. And do you have anything in the works, like a next project that you're working on?
What I'm very interested in is how the people who work most intimately with the phenomenon, there's a language, and I've become acquainted with the language, and it's very difficult to convey, but that's my next project.
Cool. Fantastic. Have you just been kicking it around in your mind, or have you started putting stuff to paper? Or
I've started putting stuff to paper, and I've had a lot of very positive reactions to it. Jacques Vallée is doing something similar. Whitley Strieber is doing something similar. So I think it's something that is being, I know this sounds really crazy, but it's something they want to know if we can understand them. And I think some of us are able to.
The sound cut out right after you said, I know this is going to sound crazy. So what did you say right after that? I think they're editing us.
That's pretty funny. Maybe I shouldn't even say it. I think that Tchaikovsky, the Russian cosmist, basically said that there will be some people who can decipher their language, and that's how we will progress as a species.
Decipher the ET's language.
Yes, and it is a language. It's totally something it's not, when we think of language, you have to get rid of our thought of language, because this is something completely different.
Yeah. Like the language that would be communicated in crop circles, for instance.
Yeah, exactly. Or in time and events. Timing of events, like synchronicities and stuff like that.
Yeah. I like it. That sounds fascinating. Well, I look forward to hearing any more of your research and anything that you have to do. And sometime, if you're up for it, maybe we can have another conversation about stuff that didn't make it in the book, because I'm sure tons of interesting stuff never even saw the light of day.
Yes, my editor was really good at taking that stuff out.
They weren't being no money was being deposited in their bank accounts, was it?
No, the thing is that they're Oxford University Press. They're not going to put that stuff in there. So
yeah, sure.
I don't blame them.
Well, yeah, then we definitely have to talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Well, have a wonderful rest of your evening. And thanks again for agreeing to be on, and perhaps we can do it again in the near future.
Sounds great, Chris.
All right. Thanks a lot, Diana.
Thank you so much.
Yes, take care.
Bye.
Oh, what an enjoyable talk. That was really fantastic. I felt like I felt like the book, first and foremost, got under the surface of UFO culture in the world today, actually, and how that takes on the guise of a religion in many aspects. But I feel like we went below that too. We went even deeper and got even a larger context for the book, which already has an immense context. There's so much covered between the covers of that book that I was really kind of flabbergasted when thinking about how to even approach talking about it. But it all sort of came to me in the last 48 hours before the show, and I think it went really, really well. There's much more to talk about, and hopefully we will follow up on that. If I have any say in it, that will definitely happen. Because as I have gathered from listening to other podcasts and watching interviews, that there's a lot that actually didn't make it into the book. And you also will be compelled, if you have read that book and you realize that there's even more to it than that. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about that. So I wholeheartedly intend on following that up. Thank you all for listening. I hope that you found it as enjoyable as I did. And if you would like to support this podcast, not this codpast, but this podcast, please go to www.patreon.com/themeltpodcast, and you will find various ways in which you can help. And financially would be fantastic. I would like to sort of expand on the horizons of this podcast and take it even farther, including travel. And a way that I can do that is to have the funds to do it. That's the only thing that's keeping me from doing it currently. So anything that you can contribute would be fantastic, even if that is just spreading the word about this podcast. That is also very helpful. And soon, believe it or not, I swear it will happen. It's starting to sound like a campaign promise at this point, but there will be a Melt Podcast website. And shortly after that, you will be able to subscribe to the Melt on various places, like wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, so on and so forth. So I will let you know when that occurs. So thank you so much for listening. Many wonderful shows in the works, and just stay tuned. All right. Until next time, take care.